Chapter 10 Public Enemy. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. 139 gold coins. The whole crowd turned to look at Daniel, as the sparkle of conversation was lit once in the hall. 145 gold coins, said the old man. 146 gold coins, retorted Daniel right away. Young man, you are risking it, said the old man angrily. 150, he then said. Daniel raised his voice to bid once more. 151 gold coins, enough, shouted the old man angrily, while punching the wooden table next to his chair, and turning it into splinters. I am warning you, brat. 165, he then said through a face contorted by rage. Underscore 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 asterisk. No rest for the wicked. Objective completion 5. 88% karma points plus 10 underscore 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 underscore. The moment the window appeared in Daniel's mind, he immediately understood that the old man had reached his limit. Daniel was not too worried about offending people at this auction house. As this auction hadn't announced any particular items, most of the people present were merchants and low-level cultivators. Only a few powerful cultivators and rich men, like the scarred old man, were present, which, considering the fact that they had waited for certain items to show up to start bidding, one could assume that they were here, not for the auction, but for those few specific items. Needless to say that nobody would expect him to go back to the slums, right after the end of this auction, especially after bidding hundreds of gold coins. The scarred old man felt irritated by Daniel, so much so that, in his mind, he started thinking of ways to teach him a lesson. His final decision was to outbid him whenever an item he was interested in would appear. For the people of Fury, wealth was everything. Strength allowed to control the weak, but at the end of the day, no matter if it was strength, power or influence, all was related to money. This had been the reason for the division of the population into distinct social classes. For the scarred old man, being tricked by a youngster dressed in servant's clothes that couldn't even afford a private booth, was unacceptable. During the auction of every single item after that, when the bidding seemed to have reached an end, Daniel would regularly start a bidding war with the final bidder, increasing the item's price by impressive amounts, and only stopping after the system would update his quest. Underscore 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 asterisk. No rest for the wicked. Objective completion 94. 12% karma points plus 10 underscore 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 underscore. At the 16th auctioned item, Daniel had already made a small army of enemies for himself. Various people had started to outbid any of his bids, although only increasing the prices for other bidders. From an external point of view, Daniel seemed to be interested in every single one of the items. But what made the group of people irritated the most, was that this damn brat seemed to be able to read their minds. In fact, whenever they felt happy with the increase in price, and waited the young man to overpay for the item, he would instead give up on it, making them pay for an item they didn't want it to begin with, or force other people to purchase the item instead. The total number of auctioned items comprised by the quest was, including the leather armor, 17. The 17th and last item for the day was Daniel's beast core. Daniel was waiting for this moment. The new quest had not only given him a chance to obtain more karma points by swindling other bidders, but also the possibility to obtain more money from the auction of his item. Feigning disappointment, he looked towards his main enemies hatefully, before once more directing his eyes on the stage. When the last auctioned item was uncovered, Daniel jumped up on his feet. His expression an elated one, and his fists shut tight, as if he had seen a long-lost brother. His actions had caught the eyes of every single person in the hall, especially his enemies. A series of malicious smirks grew on various faces within the crowd. BVEC, the next item is one you rarely see put up for auction. A peak rank 3 beast core. I have no need to remind you all of the importance a peak rank 3 beast core has to increase one's cultivation past the 3rd rank. The starting bid is 5 gold coins and every increase has to be no less than 10 silver koi. 5 gold and 50 silver coins. Shouted Daniel animatedly, 6 gold coins. Said a man in the crowd. Here, 7 gold and 50 silver. Many had noticed the enthusiasm in Daniel's voice, but while some weren't naive enough to fall for his act, some others, blinded by the outrage of being played by a mere servant, couldn't help but become his victims once again. After a couple of long minutes, the item had reached the price estimated by the auction house of 15 gold coins. However, the bidding war was still far from over. See if I don't put you in your place this time, brat. 20 gold coins. Said the scarred old man. Daniel hadn't reached any message from the Karmic System, so he was sure that someone in the crowd was willing to offer a higher price, therefore he kept going, 21 gold coins. Your master should have taught you how to respect those above you, servant, said disdainfully a beautiful woman which was occupying the booth directly opposite to the scarred old man's. This woman was wearing the attire of an elder from a known medium-sized women-only martial arts school, situated in the merchant district. She wore a purple kimono, with the yellow and green pattern of a crane soaring through the skies sewed on it. The first time Daniel noticed this woman was when she had bidded for the slave girl. What made Daniel curious about this woman, was that her number had decreased the moment she had placed her bid. Above this woman's head a small red 62, which originally was 82, could be seen floating. The first time Daniel had noticed the woman's karma, Sua had commented into his head, that woman must be very nice to her students, but slightly more brutal to her enemies. Daniel didn't know what her reasons for bidding for the slave girl were, however, he was convinced that they couldn't have been too bad, if just by bidding for her, the woman's negative karma had decreased. Unfortunately her intentions weren't enough, since according to the karmic system, the girl would be sold for a higher price than the one she had bid, leading to her being killed within 6 days by her new owner. The woman had a bone to pick with Daniel, which had made the price of the rank 4 fan that she wanted to buy, increase to almost double the original amount. 24 gold coins, said the woman. Once more, to Daniel's elation, the message didn't appear. 25, he shouted. 25 gold coins and 50 silver, said a middle-aged man with a clean-shaved beard who was sitting amongst the crowd of the first floor. 26 gold coins. Daniel's bids were fast and showed impatience. Of course, this was all an act. He wanted the other bidders to believe that he wanted the item at all costs. 28 gold coins. Said the scarred old man while acting enraged, and yet showing a hint of anxiousness. At this point of the auction, most participants were simply trying to bloat the beast core's price in order to have Daniel buy it with a huge loss. They all acted like they needed the object desperately, and yet they were approaching their limits. Some of them even pretended to argue amongst themselves. The scarred old man had placed his ultimate bid. He wanted Daniel to buy the item at almost double its worth. Come on, brat. It's all yours. Muttered the scarred old man quietly. Unfortunately, what he expected to happen didn't actually happen. His covered grin turned into a hideous one, as he noticed the wide smile that had appeared on Daniel's face. Inside Daniel's mind, a series of small windows had appeared. Underscore 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 no rest for the wicked objective completion 100% karma points. Plus 10 underscore 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 no rest for the wicked. First objective complete. Reward 170 karma points / Dragon's Breath auction house reputation. Plus 25% underscore 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 underscore. The current highest bid is 28 gold coins. Is there anyone who wants to offer more? The auctioneer said before observing the room. He then looked at the menacing looks of the various participants of the auction, before finally looking at Daniel. When the auctioneer's eyes landed on Daniel, he looked away, showing an expression completely devoid of interest. Going once, going twice. Sold to the booth number 028. Said the auctioneer dispiritedly. He then continued, this is all for today's auction. As always, you can approach the counter to collect your purchases. The Dragon's Breath Auction House hopes that you have enjoyed today's event, and wishes you a safe travel back. He then bowed deeply, and left the stage from the side. The moment those last few words were spoken, Daniel was already halfway through the door. He didn't want to give the others any time to trap him inside the auction house, so since the beginning, he had intended to leave the auction house first. When he reached the counter, he found the woman that had offered him the credit waiting for him at the counter. When she saw him, she smiled at him brightly, and said, "You really do know how to make enemies." She then handed him a small bag. "In here are 20 gold coins, we've rounded them up for you." Daniel had no reaction to this. He knew that the woman didn't consider him a naive young man anymore. And for a good reason. He had asked for 5 gold and 60 silver coins, and that was exactly what he had spent. Not counting how much he had managed to increase the bids for the item he had put up for auction. The woman then grabbed a bell from behind the counter, and ringed it 3 times. After a few seconds, the girl that Daniel had originally seen behind the counter, appeared from behind a door. Next to her was a girl in ragged clothes. Her ankles and wrists had been chained, making escape impossible for her. That girl was the slave girl that Daniel had bought with the intention of freeing. Daniel took the slave deed and key out of the girl's hands and unlocked the slave girl's binds right away. He then ripped the deed into shreds. The slave girl was too surprised by Daniel's decisive actions. She rubbed her sore wrists and cheeks, and as she was about to thank him, Daniel grabbed her wrist and started heading towards the exit of the building. As the woman noticed Daniel's sudden actions, "You are welcome to come back whenever you want, have a safe travel back," she said while slightly increasing the volume of her voice as each of her words came out of her mouth. "I wouldn't hold my breath," muttered Daniel as he left the auction house. Going back to this auction house was out of the question for Daniel. The woman had tried to scheme against him from the very beginning, and even after he had made the auction house gain a much larger amount of money in commissions, by increasing bids and making many enemies for himself, they still tried to invite him back to repeat this, despite the dangers he faced. Daniel had no good opinions about the Dragon's Breath auction house. Without giving her a moment to speak, Daniel dragged the girl between alleys, only stopping after reaching a particularly dark one, just a few hundred meters away from the auction house. He then let go of the girl's hand, and said to her, "You are free now, do you have someplace to go?" The girl shook her head gently, her eyes reddening. Daniel took pity on her. He had imagined his sister being in her shoes, and the idea that she would wander the streets until she would be made a slave again, was unacceptable to him. "Okay, you can stay with me and my sister for a bit. We currently live in the slums, but we will move soon." Chapter 11 The Slave Girl and the Sister. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Merchant District, Western Gate. 17.08 In front of the large gate that connected the working district and the merchant district, a long row of people could be seen waiting in line to pass through. Amongst this row of people, two teenagers could be seen waiting in line. They both had servant clothes, and each of them had surprisingly good looks. These two people were, of course, Daniel and the slave girl. Only a couple of hours had passed since the end of the auction, and Daniel had been so focused on leaving the merchant district, that he didn't have a chance to properly speak to the girl he had just set free. He only stopped once to make sure that the girl didn't have a family to come back to, and to offer her a place to stay. After that interaction had ended, and the girl had shyly accepted Daniel's offer, the system's message finally appeared. Underscore 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 asterisk freedom for all. First objective complete. Reward: 75 karma points underscore 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 underscore. The girl wasn't really expecting Daniel to honor his promise, and when he saw him in the crowd, bidding for her, she still had doubts about his motives. All these doubts had been eradicated from her mind, the moment he destroyed the slave deed and set her free on the spot. She spent the next couple of hours in silence, following this strange young man as he took her to a bath house, as he bought her clothes, and offered to her a place to stay. "My name is Daniel, by the way," said Daniel randomly, while waiting in line. "Yours," he then continued. "Maya," she answered in a low voice. Daniel was thinking about how to ask his next question. He never had meaningful conversations with anyone but his sister, nor did he know how to deal with difficult subjects, so he decided to ask directly. "You don't look used to being a slave, what happened to you?" he asked her. Maya looked at him and said, "I am not. I was the young mistress of the Ruline house. My full name is Maya Hor Ruline," said the girl with hints of pride and sadness in her voice. Daniel was surprised by the Maya's words. He didn't know who the master of the Ruline house was, nor how important the Ruline were in Carolus's spectrum of families, sects and schools, but he knew that a house, in order to have a master and a young mistress, had to have some sort of power. He looked at Maya and asked her, "What happened to your house? How could they allow their young mistress to be taken as a slave?" Maya's look turned even sadder before responding, "My father was a powerful martial cultivator of the 7th rank. He was one of the main forces of Carolus's army during the war, 8 years ago, but he disappeared without leaving a trace when the war was coming to an end." A clear trace of anger grew in her voice as she continued, "One of my father's old enemies, the master of the School of Everlasting Fury, didn't waste time to accuse him of deserting for the enemy kingdom," she said while biting her bottom lip. "After the war ended, and my father never returned to clear his name, many voices through the kingdom started to circulate, spreading the news that the master of the Ruline house had betrayed the Carolus kingdom. So many people had been lost in that war. And when the rumor of a traitor had been spread, the people demanded the king to issue an eradication order for my entire family." At this point, tears were forming on the corners of her eyes. "The king must have thought that we had no more worth without my father. So he gave in under the pressure, and ordered an eradication campaign against my house," she said while brushing the welling up tears from her eyes. "We had been alerted by one of my father's loyal friends, that the king had ordered for our extermination, so in the middle of the night, we escaped. And have been on the run ever since." Daniel didn't know what to say. He knew nothing about politics, nor did he know what happened within the high echelons of a kingdom. After thinking for a few moments, he asked, "So what happened to the rest of your family?" But he immediately regretted asking it. The eradication campaign didn't stop only because we had escaped. We had become traitors within the kingdom, so no matter where we went, when we were found out, we would be hunted down and killed. From what I know, I might as well be the only survivors." After Maya finished explaining, she couldn't help remembering all the painful moments she had been through in the last half of her life. and start crying. Daniel had never been one to judge without knowing the facts. He knew of the dark side of people, in fact, he could see it clearly thanks to his karmic system. So even if he felt angry when learning that Maya's father was one of Carolus's main forces during the war, and therefore one of the warriors that had been too late to save his father, he still understood that, since the one who accused Maya's father of being a traitor was one of his enemies, that accusation must have been a defamatory one, aimed to turn an enemy into a traitor. Of course, everyone knew about the bad blood between the Ruline's house master and the master of the School of Everlasting Fury. Most had guessed that the latter was aiming to get rid of one of his old enemies when he accused the former of treason, so most of the king's council and the king himself had rejected his ideas of treating the Ruline's master and family as traitors. What forced the king to change his mind was the public outrage that, when the rumors of the Ruline's house master had deserted for the enemy kingdom spread like wildfire through his still grieving kingdom, had forced him to cave in. Daniel dropped the topic and waited patiently for their turn to pass through to arrive. Half an hour later, they had reached the commoners section of the working district. On his way back, Daniel had stopped more than once to various shops and marketplaces to buy the essentials for Maya, numerous rank 1 beast cores, and a cultivation manual for martial and spiritual cultivation. He and Maya walked towards his sister's school, and waited for her to come out to go back home together. Daniel had taken that habit in the past couple of years. Whenever he would be close to his sister's school, if her lessons were close to come to an end, he would wait for her to come out, before going home together. After half an hour of waiting, young men and women started coming out of the building. Daniel looked around until he noticed a group of 7 teenagers, 4 of them were boys and 3 of them were girls. Amongst this group of people, one girl stood out the most. She had an imp-thin figure that was shown by her tightly fitting clothes. Her complexion was porcelain white and her cheeks were of a natural rosy color. Her slightly arched eyebrows stood above a pair gentle wide-set eyes, with pupils of a beautiful brown-green color. Her delicate ears framed a just as delicate button-like nose. Right underneath, a pair of bow-shaped, healthy red lips opened and closed, showing a set of pearly white teeth. Her caramel-colored hair flowed above her chest area in big waves, bordering her face beautifully. She was chatting peacefully with her group of friends, and when she noticed the young man standing at the school's gate, she waved her arm at him, Dan. Daniel's smile grew wide as he and Maya approached the group of teenagers. As the girl which had called for his name approached him, Daniel said gently, "Sister." The smile never leaving his face. She hugged Daniel tightly and said, "Did you eat what I've left you this morning?" "Of course." "It was awful," he said with a smirk on his face. Daniel had a special relationship with his sister. She was older than him, but since he provided for the both of them, they had always felt strange behaving like the classical, older sister and younger brother. The complicity between the two was so deep that they behaved more like partners in crime than siblings. After a few moments, Daniel took the books right out of his sister's hands and put them into his backpack. He then looked at her while indicating towards Maya, and said, "Sister, this is Maya, she'll be staying with us for a while." He then looked towards Maya and said, "Maya, she is my sister, Rayla." He then gave a moment for the news to sink into his sister's head. Rayla had complete trust in Daniel's actions. For her, her brother had good judgment, and whatever he did, he would do it for a good reason. Of course, this had never stopped her from teasing him for his decisions. With this objective in mind, she looked at Maya. "My real name is Ray Heel, but you can call me Rayla. It's a real pleasure to meet you, Maya. I hope you're not in trouble because of my brother. If he tries anything weird, a kick in between his legs is always an available option," she said while smirking. Daniel expected this kind of comment from her, just like every other member of her group of friends, which had become used to the dynamics of this particular pair of siblings. Maya, on the other hand, was extremely surprised. She thought that Daniel had been rude to her, and that Rayla wanted to make him pay for his crude remark, but that wasn't the case. After bidding farewell to her schoolmates, Rayla, Daniel and Maya started heading back home. In their travel back, Maya and Rayla chatted for a bit. It didn't take long for Rayla to learn about Maya's circumstances. Maya felt grateful to Daniel, so she didn't want her brother to have secrets from his sister. She had decided that she would tell her situation to Rayla, and then let the pair of siblings decide if it was worth helping her. What surprised Maya even more, was that whenever she mentioned Daniel's actions, the expression on Rayla's face grew prouder and prouder. At the end of Maya's story, Rayla's trust for Daniel's judgment had only reinforced. She then approached Daniel by the side, hit his arm with her elbow, and kissed the side of his head. Maya expected a heated conversation between the pair of siblings, but again, she was wrong. Daniel had expected his sister's action, as they weren't uncommon. "Sister, I will go home and pack our stuff, would you mind taking Maya with you and go to look for a bigger house in the commoners' district?" As he said these words, he kept looking at his sister's expression from the corners of his eyes. He then added, "Somewhere close to your friends' houses maybe." His sister looked at him with wide eyes. A smile that made people turn around in disbelief grew on Rayla's face. Daniel had promised to her more than once that, once their debt would be settled, and things would have been easier for them, they would move closer to her friends. That had become one of his sister's dreams. Rayla couldn't help but wrap her slender arms around her brother's chest, and squeeze him tightly. Daniel felt like his promise to his mother had been partially fulfilled. She was safe, she was happy. And she would have a good life. These were Daniel's most important objectives. After a few seconds, Rayla let go of her brother. Daniel handed a small bag containing 10 gold coins to her, and asked her to rent the biggest house she could find. He then bid farewell to the two girls and started walking towards the slums. When reaching his house, before starting to pack their belongings, he took a small pouch which contained the rank 1 beast cores and the books regarding martial and spiritual cultivation, then he sat on his bed. "Sua, mind explaining how do I use my karma points again?" Chapter 12 Cultivating. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's about time. I thought you would end up only using me for becoming rich. He answered Sua. Part of Daniel's plan had always been to become stronger. Strength was dependent on money in theory, but in order to make money, unless born into a rich family, one required something to rely on. Originally Daniel wanted to pay his debt, allow his sister to graduate from school, and then let her find a good job. But after seeing the way the wealthy treated human lives of the lowest level, he realized that he needed more than that. He needed a way to prevent others from stepping over him and his sister, like the hotel owner did with his family. He needed strength. Daniel wasn't harmless anymore, he didn't need to live by the day like he used to. He had the karmic system now. He could plan. Primary quest started. You can't do good without strength, description. Obtain enough power to protect those in need. First objective set. Cultivate to the peak vasodilation of the martial cultivation, or the peak profound spiritual connection of the spiritual cultivation. Optional. Reach perfection before breaking through the next stage. Reward. Karma plus 500, plus 1000, time limit. 3 months, 4 months. Surprise grew on Daniel's face as one more window appeared inside his mind, warning him that a new quest had started. Since the moment he had awakened Sua and the karmic system, Daniel had understood a few things about it. First of all, a primary quest had to start from a train of thought. For example, the Freedom for All quest had started when had witnessed the treatment Maya had received by the fat merchant, and his desire to set her free, had triggered the creation of the quest. Second, a quest has to pertain to karma. In each quest a decision had to be made that would either grant him positive or negative karma, meaning that he could possibly create any sort of quest, provided that he formulated it within the parameters of karmic influence. The very last quest, for example, wouldn't have been created if Daniel only wished to become strong. But since he decided to become strong in order to protect his sister, he turned his motive into one that would influence his karma, therefore creating the quest. Well, that comes in handy. Sua was just about to explain how to utilize karmic points to Daniel, when the window appeared. He was, of course, part of the karmic system, so he was able to see through every change within the system itself, like Daniel could. It's very simple, really. Start cultivating, and whenever you will enter a lengthy process, just think of speeding it up. Your karmic points will slowly decrease, until you'll run out. Have you learned nothing from me? Trial and error. Come on. Explained Sua. Daniel still didn't know anything about cultivation. That was the reason why he had bought the cultivation manuals. He took them out and started reading through their pages. In Daniel's world, cultivation had two main branches. The martial cultivation, which allowed a person to strengthen their bodies through the use of ki, and spiritual cultivation, which had the aim of cultivating one's spirit through the use of mana, and increase its connection to the spiritual plane, from which the cultivator could absorb the power required to use magic. The basics of martial and spiritual cultivation explain the first two main stages of cultivation. Each main stage was divided into 3 sub-stages, commonly referred to as ranks. Each person would be born as a mortal, and their default stages of cultivation were at the muscle strengthening of the martial cultivation and the spirit forming of the spiritual cultivation. These 2 stages were known as the starting point of every human being, and therefore referred to as unranked. The first 2 main stages of the martial cultivation were the body strengthening stage, and the nigh-inhuman stage. The body strengthening stage started with the organs enhancing stage, or rank 1, which enhanced your organs' resistance and efficiency. The rank 2, or the bones refining stage, was the stage that would allow the cultivator to increase the density of their bones. The third and last stage of the body strengthening stage was called vasodilation, and was the dilation of one's blood vessels, which would increase the flux of blood that would allow the body keep up with the increased strain. After breaking through from the body strengthening stage, one would find himself into the nigh-inhuman stage. The nigh-inhuman stage was similarly divided into 3 stages, or ranks. Starting from the full control stage, or rank 4, which allowed a person to perfect the control of their body. The rank 5, described as the reflex heightening stage, was the stage that allowed a cultivator to increase his reflexes to an inhuman level. Ultimately, the surrounding awareness stage, or rank 6, was the stage that allowed a cultivator to develop a field around their bodies, inside which they would have complete awareness. The book that Daniel had bought only mentioned the third main stage of the martial cultivation as immortal path stage. Similarly to the basics of the martial cultivation, the basics of spiritual cultivation only explained the depth of the first 2 stages. They were called the spirit connection and spiritual synchronization stages. The stages of spiritual cultivation were much easier to understand, as the spirit had much less parts to nurture when compared to the body. Therefore, each main stage of the spiritual cultivation stages were used to indicate the progress in the main stage, and were referred to as faint, moderate and profound. For example, a person in the first rank of the spiritual cultivation would be referred to as a spiritual cultivator at the faint spiritual connection stage. Like in the manual of martial cultivation, the third stage of spiritual cultivation had only been mentioned, and it was called the spirit merging stage. The more Daniel read the more he understood, but at the end, he started to have some doubts. Why was there no mention to perfection in any of these books? He read the manual's pages over and over again, but the answers he looked for were nowhere to be found. According to the manuals, one could attempt to break through to the next stage right after refining their blood vessels if cultivated the body, or reach the profound spiritual connection if they cultivated the spirit. Daniel had no way of understanding the depths of these stages with the information he was given by these manuals. He had 4 months to reach the peak of the first stage, and learn what perfection meant. Setting his thoughts aside, Daniel started reading the methods of cultivation depicted in the manuals. A martial cultivator produced ki through the strain of the body. Ki, similarly to the core essence of a ranked beast, was the essence of the human's body, and it was produced constantly. Breathing, exercising, training and combat. These were just few of the methods a martial cultivator had to produce ki. The produced ki could then be used to gradually refine the cultivator's body. Just like a martial practitioner used ki to cultivate, a spiritual cultivator used mana to strengthen the spirit. Mana was a natural essence that could be found everywhere in the world. Each and every type of essence, included ki and beast essence, were in fact, mana. The very own definition of mana comprised every sort of naturally formed essence which belonged to the earthly plane. A spiritual cultivator could produce ki just like any martial cultivator through the use of breathing and training, and then use the ki to strengthen their spirit. Most people had no means to cultivate and therefore stayed at the spirit forming, or muscle strengthening stages, so they erroneously considered mana as an alternative sort of essence to ki, while instead calling it a generic sort of essence, would be much more accurate. At some point in the past, after martial cultivators had found out that every type of essence could nurture the spirit, they started to experiment with the aim of finding out every viable sources of essence which could be used to increment their cultivation speed. After dozens of years, they had realized that every form of essence produced by a living being could be absorbed by their bodies and turned into ki. This had been the reason that had started the hunt for ranked beasts, and many uncountable wars between humans and the other races. Daniel had decided to cultivate the martial path, so he read the martial way of cultivation and adjusted his body into the lotus position. He had also decided to avoid using beast cores, as he wanted to familiarize to the human's natural way of cultivation through self-produced ki. For an hour, he breathed in and out slowly. Whenever he breathed in, his enhanced lungs would expand and send waves after waves of newly produced ki through his muscles, blood vessels and organs. When this ki had reached every corner body, Daniel forced it to seep through his tissue and reach his bones, then he began to refine them. His marrow slowly became denser, his carticalge became more elastic, the stratum of cortical bone became harder by the minute. After another hour, Daniel decided to stop. He had read that breakthrough was a lengthy process, and he wanted to know how much of his karma cultivating for 2 straight hours had consumed. Dan Heel. Karmic Systems wielder. Age. 14 rank. Peak rank 2 of martial cultivation. Early rank 2 of spiritual cultivation karma. 656. Daniel was extremely surprised that it took him only 2 hours to increase his cultivation from early rank 2 to peak rank 2. Unfortunately, he still had no idea of the rate his karmic system had speeded his cultivation. All he knew was that, before he started cultivating, he had 662 karma points, which meant that, for basic breathing cultivation, he would require to spend 1 point every 20 minutes. This had left him elated, as this type of cultivation was effortless and required a very small amount of karma points. Of course, he knew that different methods of cultivation would increase the amount of ki produced, which would likely require longer times to be absorbed. When he was about to make an attempt by using a rank 1 beast core, he heard knocking sounds coming from his door. At this point, Daniel realized that he had been cultivating for the past 2 hours, and that he still hadn't started to pack things up. He put his beast cores and manuals back into his backpack, and went to answer the door. Behind it, a couple of men were standing one in front of the other. The one in front was a short and skinny man, while the one in the back was tall and stout. The skinny man had a small triangular face, with a nose so big that it looked out of place. On his head, a lock of thin hair had been glued to his scalp with the intent of hiding his impending baldness. At the base of his neck, a vicious-looking scar that reached from ear to ear could be seen pulsating whenever he breathed in. The tall and burly man was completely bald. His eyes small as a pair of needles, and his neck was so fat that it was indistinguishable where his jaw ended and where his neck started. Daniel knew these 2 men all too well. He had never learned their real names, but he knew that within their organization, they were called Rat and Sweet Cheeks. The skinny man was, of course, Rat. The reason why the big and fat one was called Sweet Cheeks had always been a mystery to him. What was more important than the origin of their nicknames, was the fact that these two men worked for the hotel owner to whom he owed his debt. Chapter 13 Paying One's Debt. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Daniel, said Rat with an amicable smile on his face. Daniel had no good impressions about these two men. They always came a couple of days before the end of the month, to remind them what would happen to him and his sister in case they wouldn't be able to pay in time. Cheeks. Rat. Daniel had met them many times before, and in time, he had found out how acknowledging Sweet Cheeks first, would always enrage Rat. Unfortunately, Rat knew just as well where to hit back. You are always the same arrogant little shit, ain't ya? Said Rat while laughing. He then looked at Daniel attentively and continued, I can't wait to drag you to the mines. And have some fun with your pretty sis. Daniel felt his blood boil when he noticed that, while saying his last remark, Rat had touched himself in between his legs, hinting what he meant by, have some fun with your pretty sis. Happy about hitting where it hurt, Rat added, remember that the boss owns you, brat. Forget the next payment and you'll see, why don't you take me to your boss then? I already have his money. Retorted Daniel right away. Rat's moment had been ruined, and he wasn't in the mood to joke around anymore, so he made a serious face and said, petty thief, you are safe for another month then. Give me the money. He then extended his hand towards Daniel. I think you have misunderstood. I have all your boss's money. Said Daniel as a faint smile grew on his face. He then took a small bag out of his backpack, and let a couple of gold coins slide over his palm, showing them to the couple of goons. Rat slowly retracted his hand while looking seriously at Daniel. To say that the idea of convincing him to give him the money, like any other monthly payment, and then report to his boss that he had only received 10 silver coins as usual didn't cross his mind. Would be to lie. Unfortunately, the thought left as fast as it appeared. He knew very well how cunning Daniel was, and even if he felt comfortable with cheating him, he would never do that in front of Sweet Cheeks. One had to know that Sweet Cheeks and him weren't friends, they were partners, and Sweet Cheeks was fiercely loyal to their boss. Alright, let's go to see the boss then. Rat said, still irritated that Daniel had decided to show him the money in front of Sweet Cheeks. Commoners Section, 18.12 Inside a large hotel was a square lounge room. This lounge room had 3 doors that allowed access inside. Next to one of these doors was a counter, behind which a young beautiful woman was standing. On the other side of this room, 2 couches had been placed one facing the other, and in between them, was a spotlessly clean coffee table. On one of these couches, Daniel was sitting. Daniel had been facing one of these 3 doors for the past 10 minutes. He had seen this door open only once, and it was when a burly man had come out to chat with the young woman behind the counter. During the few moments in which the door had been opened, before it closed, Daniel noticed that inside the room on the other side of this door, at least 2 dozens of though-looking men were waiting. What startled Daniel was that each and every one of the men he had laid eyes upon, had negative karma, which made him guess that these men were guards, and that they were waiting for something to happen before storming in and defend their employer. While Daniel was worrying about how wise the choice of coming here now had been, the large double door next to the counter suddenly opened. Rat came out of the room, looked at Daniel and said, "Boss is ready to see you, come in." Daniel got up from the couch and walked towards the double door. Behind the double door, a long study room extended for at least 20 meters. A large library covered the entirety of the wall at the far end of the room. Large windows at the right side flushed the entire room with the reddish lights of dusk. Halfway through the room was a coffee table, around which 3 chairs had been placed. On one of these chairs Sweet Cheeks was sitting. On the far end of the room, right in front of the library, was a large ebony black desk. Behind this desk, a gentle-looking old man was sitting peacefully, sipping tea from a refined-looking cup. This man seemed to be approaching his late 60s, with smoky gray hair and skin wizened with age. Nevertheless, the shine of his watery blue eyes, removed from the minds of everyone who saw him, the idea that he wasn't the brutal man that he had been in the past. Behind him, a couple of burly men stood quietly. Daniel walked next to Rat until they reached right in front of the desk, then Rat walked back and sat on one of the chairs near Sweet Cheeks. "So, you are Dan's son. You look just like him," said the old man amiably. Daniel was aware that the old man was acquainted with his father, so it wasn't a surprise for him when he mentioned his name. "I'm here to pay my mother's debt," said Daniel, refusing to follow the old man's topic of conversation. "Rash. It's a family trait, I guess," muttered the old man. "Your mother's debt is 7 gold and 40 silver coins, do you have all of them?" Daniel threw the small bag of coins on the desk, right in front of the old man. The old man nodded at one of the goons standing behind him, which then started checking the content of the small bag. As his man confirmed that they were coins, and started counting them, the old man looked at Daniel and said, "Have you ever heard about the reason why I was acquainted to your father?" The smile on his face still present and as amiable as it ever was. "If you are mentioning it, it must have meant money for you." "My guess is that you'll tell me now," Daniel retorted immediately. "That it does. Not just any money, your money." The old man was surprised by the calm attitude Daniel had. Many young men and women, inheritors of their parents' debt, had stood in front of him, but none was as calm as Daniel was. "Unfortunately, your father and I had a less official agreement." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He had expected the old man to try to extort more money from him, that is the reason why, noticing the room full of bodyguards, he had felt slightly worried. What he never expected, was for the old man to talk about the dealings he had with his father. Our deal was also of a different nature. The old man took his time. He had learned, after so many years of activity, that one had to make the fish curious before it would take a bite. Meanwhile, the man standing next to the old man had finished counting the coins. He then put the small bag back on the desk and nodded at the old man quietly. "The last payment has been made. You and your sister have no more reasons to worry about us," said the old man, dropping the topic of his father abruptly. He then started to slowly sip on his tea once again. Daniel stood in front of the desk for a full minute, and as Rat reached his side and was about to escort him out of the room, he said, "Tell me about the deal you had with my father." The old man put down the cup, looked at him and then responded, "Then came to me, years back. Looking for a slave." "Bullshit," said Daniel furiously, "my father would never buy a slave. I never said he wanted to buy one. He wanted to free 1 inch," retorted the old man while slowly adding a sugar cube to his cup of tea. This time, Daniel kept quiet and allowed the old man to finish. "The slave your father wanted me to find was his younger brother. He had escaped from your family's ancestral home, when your family was a little more than a couple of brats playing in the mud. Looking for him was the reason your father moved to Fury to begin with. When he first came to this city, he saw his brother being sold to a mine baron, which he later learned had a business relation with me. After that, he came to me," said the old man, all at once. Daniel had heard from his father that he wasn't a native of Fury, that he had moved here only a couple of years before his sister had been born. What he never learned, was why he got himself killed in war, before I could tell him that I had found his brother. Daniel was shocked about this story. He spent years trying to keep his sister and himself free, without knowing that an uncle they had never heard about, had been working tirelessly in a mine for the past 16 years. He didn't have much time to enjoy his freedom before a new deal had been placed in front of him. And he was sure that this deal wouldn't be any cheaper than the last. Of course, Daniel could always refuse to pay for informations regarding this unknown uncle, but the single thought of doing so made him imagine the disappointment his father would feel for him. A man that had always told him that family was more important than anything else. "How much?" he said dispiritedly. A sinister smile grew on the old man's face. Your father had promised to me 10 gold coins for the information. But I have kept it for 16 years. How do you feel about double? Daniel's fists tightened so hard that, if he hadn't reached the second rank of martial cultivation, his fingernails would have easily pierced his skin. I don't have that kind of money, said Daniel through his gritting teeth. It's all right, you know I like to help, said the old man as his lips opened into a wide smile, showing 2 rows of slightly yellow teeth. How about I give you 1 year? And you pay 30 gold coins. Asterisk primary quest updated. Freedom for all, star. Description. Eradicate slavery from the world. Scanned objective set. Find the location of your uncle, and free him. Optional. Kill the hotel owner. Reward. Karma plus 750, plus 1500, failure. Karma .2000 time limit. Your uncle will die in 23 years, 9 months and 11 days. After taking a moment to analyze the new quest's objective, Daniel nodded his head and accepted the deal. There was no need to refuse the old man's proposition, as making money wasn't as hard to him anymore. I accept, but I want the information now, said Daniel firmly while advancing his condition. Very well. But this time, we'll make a legal contract. I don't want to wait 20 more years for another brat to come looking for this useless information, added the old man. After signing the document, and leaving a blood print on it, a letter was given to Daniel, before he was escorted out of the building. Once outside of the building, Daniel started examining the content of the letter. Inside it was a sheet of paper, on which a few informations were written. Tien Heel, 31 years old, sold to the Silver Peak Mining Company when he was 15, for the price of 12 gold 50 silver coins. Daniel put the sheet of paper back into the envelope, and started walking back towards his home in the slums. Chapter 14 Moving. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Slums, 21.15. When Daniel managed to get back to his house in the slums, he noticed the dim lights coming from the windows, and realized that Maya and Rayla had come back. Inside the house, a couple of beautiful girls were sitting at a table, above which, various dishes had been placed. About time. We were starting to think that you wouldn't be back tonight, said Rayla. Welcome back, said Maya while giggling shyly. After she had gotten used to Rayla's personality in the evening that they had spent together, they quickly became friends. I like how you've packed, said Rayla teasingly while indicating at their untouched belongings. Daniel smiled, took his cape off and dropped his bag on the ground. Sorry, I had something to settle first. He then took his seat on the table. Did you find a house? He asked to the 2 girls. Oh, yes, said Rayla excitedly. She then started listing all the houses they had seen, their prices, and the locations. In the beginning, Daniel wanted a house with at least 3 rooms, but after learning about his uncle's situation, he decided to go for a larger house. Daniel had slowly started to become aware that the Freedom for All quest would not only require him to free people along the road, but also take responsibility for them. For example, he had already set Maya free, but because of her belonging to a family accused of treason, she would either be killed by bounty hunters or be once again enslaved if he decided to let her go on her way. Provided that he knew that he wouldn't be able to take every person the system will make him help in, he wanted to at least have a chance to, if necessary. One thing was for certain, the Karmic System wasn't free. When listening to his sister's description about the houses they had seen, Daniel noticed the emphasis she had put when describing 2 of the few houses she had listed. The first one was a medium-sized house with 3 bedrooms and a small yard in the front. It was situated near her friends' houses, and was next to various commercial roads. Its size was big enough for the 3 of them to live in, and the price was fairly affordable. The second was a 4-story building in which an old man lived. The building used to be a small hotel, but after a few financial problems, had been forced to cease activity. The old man had purchased the building and lived in it ever since, renting the rooms to students. The reason why Rayla had put emphasis on describing this location was because it was situated close to her school, and the nearby buildings were the school's dorms. "What do you think, Maya?" Daniel said while looking at the girl. He felt slightly odd about the idea of making Maya stay in their house. After all, she didn't know them that well. Furthermore, Maya had been a slave, and he didn't want to give her the impression that she wasn't completely free, so when he heard about the building with separated rooms, he became fairly excited. Rayla interjected right away, "If we take 3 rooms here, going to school would be much easier. And all of us would have their own privacy." Of course, Rayla had also noticed her brother's reaction when she mentioned the 4-story building, so she pressed on it. Before Maya could say anything, Daniel said, "Sounds nice. Wouldn't have to sleep in a room filled with the poisonous clouds made by your cook." Ouch. SSH. A underhanded kick on the shin bone interrupted his sentence. "Fine. Separate rooms then." He feigned indignation while rapidly rubbing his unhurt shin. Daniel genuinely wanted to hear Maya's opinion, but also thought that, if Rayla had interjected on the subject, she must have had a good reason, and he was right. When Rayla and Maya had spent time together alone, she had noticed that the time spent on the run, not to talk about her being enslaved, had left a deep scar on her. She didn't trust other people easily, but she also wasn't the kind of person who would advance requests if other people's money was being used. That's why whenever Rayla asked for Maya's opinion when looking at a house, she would simply mention some good qualities about the house, but would never give her true opinion. After dropping the conversation, the 3 started to eat dinner. Half an hour later, the 2 girls started chatting amongst themselves, while Daniel sat quietly on a corner. "You girls should go to bed early tonight, we'll move tomorrow. Maya, you can sleep on Rayla's bed, she'll sleep on mine. Where will you sleep?" Rayla asked. Daniel looked at her and responded, "I have something to do, I don't know how long it will take, don't worry about me." "Fine, but don't you dare act tired tomorrow just to make us hold the bags." As the girls stood up and prepared to go to bed, "Maya, can I talk to you for a moment?" Daniel said. Maya walked towards him, and as she was about to talk. "You've told me your father was a powerful martial cultivator. He must have had plenty of knowledge about it, right?" Maya had been taken by surprise, but she composed herself right away and nodded her head firmly. "Have you ever learned martial cultivation from your father?" he asked with eyes filled with hope. Maya's eyes flashed with a bit of sadness when she remembered about the time she spent with her father. After a few moments, she looked at Daniel and responded with a simple yes. Daniel didn't want to beat around the bush, so he simply asked, "Have you ever heard about a perfect state between stages?" A surprised look appeared on Maya's face once more. She had in fact heard about the perfect state from her father. The perfect state was a second stratum of refining of the body through ki. A person at the perfect state would have a much deeper foundation, perfecting their bodies to a point where their battle prowess was near that of a next stage practitioner. The idea of perfecting their bodies interested many practitioners of old, but unfortunately, it wasn't easy to reach. The problem wasn't talent or resources. The problem was time. In fact, refining one's body to the perfect stage would take years. Years which practitioners weren't willing to spend stuck at the same stage. After tens of thousands of years, most records have been lost about this subject, and as reaching perfection of the stage turned into a simple matter of increasing one's battle prowess, the practice had lost people's interest and had been slowly given up. Maya explained everything she had heard from her father about this subject to Daniel, and then she went to bed. "What is the point of reaching the perfect state if all it does is increasing my battle prowess? And why would the system reward me with so many points for reaching it?" A series of questions rushed into Daniel's mind as he quietly sat in a corner of the living room. "No point thinking about it now," he muttered. One thing that Daniel had learned from Maya was that the perfect state is an optional stage in between major stages, so there was no need for him to worry about it now, since he was still at the peak of the second rank. What left Daniel slightly excited was that, when thinking at the timeline that the quest had given him to reach the perfect stage, he had realized that, the fact that the system had only given him an additional month for reaching it, meant that it wouldn't take him a full month to reach it if he wanted to. In a good mood, Daniel took a few rank 1 beast cores from his bag and started to attempt a breakthrough to the third rank. His intention was to keep cultivating using beast cores for the whole night. Sitting quietly with 2 rank 1 beast cores on his hands, he started to absorb them, and direct the raging beast essence towards his bones. After a full hour, Daniel finally managed to break through the early vasodilation stage. 2 more hours later, he had reached the mid-rank 3, and when the first lights of the morning started to shine through the windows, 5 hours later, he was at the late 3rd rank. The difference between Daniel's body before and now was abysmal. The more he cultivated, the easier it was for him to produce ki and to make it circulate through his body. Daniel checked the content of his bag and noticed that he had consumed 2/3 of his beast cores, while the 8 straight hours of cultivation had made his karma points drop from 656 to 416. After making the calculation, Daniel had realized that cultivating with beast cores consumed 10 times the amount of karma points compared to cultivating without. Naturally, Daniel had also felt the difference between the 2 types of cultivation. Cultivating with beast cores forced the beast essence inside one's body in an aggressive manner. One required to direct the foreign form of power and use it to refine their bodies. The difference between the two was like the difference between tempering your body underneath a gentle stream of water and a raging waterfall. The latter would be much more efficient, but also more dangerous, while the former was safe but far slower. Daniel didn't feel any sort of weakness from spending all night cultivating. In fact, whenever he advanced, he would feel his body become stronger than ever. While he waited for Maya and his sister to wake up, he decided to prepare breakfast. As the first street noises started to reach the insides of Daniel's house, the 2 sleepy-looking girls came out of the room while still wearing pajamas. The 2 looked sleepy for 2 different reasons. Rayla had slept peacefully, while Maya had barely managed to close her eyes for the entire night. After breakfast, the 3 went to a nearby bath house to clean themselves. They then headed back home and started packing their belongings. Commoners Section 11. 58. A small group of 3 was walking on the busy streets. 2 of them were beautiful girls, while the third was an unfortunate young man, which currently had a bag 2 times his size strapped on his back. "Are you sure it's this way?" asked Daniel. She turned towards him and, "Are you asking me if I've forgotten where my school is?" she asked back, slightly irritated. Daniel, startled by her irritated tone, said, "All right, calm down. It's just that there is a lot of people around giving you 2 weird looks." Daniel had learned his sister's weak point. Whenever he made her angry, he would simply need to throw a subtle compliment to her looks, and then she would usually calm down. He was right, as Rayla looked at him sideways. Her eyelids so thin that they almost looked like they were closed. And then she slowly calmed down. "I think they are staring at you. And how weird you look with that huge bag behind your back," she scoffed. "Why did you even insist to take all the stuff yourself? Are you trying to steal a mule's job?" "Ha ha ha, very funny. If you used half of the effort you spend on thinking of ways to mock me into your sense of direction, I wouldn't have to come pick you up from school so damn often. Or at least we would have arrived already." Daniel retorted sarcastically. "Fine. We are here," she said while throwing her hands in the air. What stood in front of the 3 was a large 4-story building. The building had a rectangular shape, which expanded in width more than in height. Its white stone walls were so smooth that they looked like they had been carved from one immense boulder. Long balconies could be seen connecting every room from outside of the building, and decorating the frontal wall were hundreds of rosewood boards placed vertically, diagonally, and horizontally. The number of windows visible from the outside suggested that either each room had more than one window, or the former hotel contained a large amount of rooms. Above the fourth floor, a gable roof extended through the entire building, covering it completely. At the ground floor, an impressive-looking double door stood above a short set of wooden steps. Chapter 15. The building owner. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Whoa! An impressive building, said Daniel with a surprised look on his face. As Rayla was about to boast about her capabilities, the double door swung open. From behind it, a serious-looking old man came out. This old man had a head full of gray thick brushed-back hair, and a well-kept full beard. The old signs of age on the man's face betrayed his real age, which approached his mid-70s, but made him look like a man in his mid-50s. His back, differently from most people of his age, was straight as an arrow. The look on his face was serious and dignified, almost as if he didn't appreciate the intrusion. His eyes were sharp as swords, and of a deep indistinguishable color, with shades spanning from light gray and dark green. Ironically, the old man's eye color betrayed his age more than his skin or hair color did. Every single detail on this old man made the three guess that, when he was younger, he had been an extremely handsome man. Rayla was the first to talk. "Good afternoon, sir, we are back," she said with a smile on her face. The old man didn't respond, he simply looked at the two girls and then his eyes stopped on Daniel. His sharp eyes narrowed slightly, and after a few moments, he finally said, "Very well. Follow me to pick your rooms." He then turned around and moved back inside the building. The three followed him, and as they entered, Maya and Rayla kept an eye on Daniel's reaction. And for a good reason. As expected, Daniel's jaw dropped when he saw the insides of the building. The place didn't look like a dismissed hotel, it actually looked like a fully working one. The entire hall was enlightened by the large chandeliers, with lights of various sizes that flooded the room with a bright sunlight of magic nature. Various sets of refined yet comfortable couches surrounded just as many coffee tables, from which small planters had been carved in the middle. These carved planters contained clean dirt partially covered in grass, and a few different types of flowers. Each table had different combinations of unique-looking flowers which made every booth different from the other. Before heading straight to the rooms, the old man patiently showed the three to the lobby, the kitchen, the training grounds, cultivation rooms, and utilities. After the three picked their rooms, the old man left the three without saying a word. "Rayla, did you pay him already?" asked Daniel. Rayla looked at him and responded, "Not yet, want to do the honors," she said before throwing the small bag of coins back at Daniel. "When we came the first time, he said that it was 1 gold coin each per month," she added before going back into unpacking her belongings. The low prices of their rooms had slightly surprised Daniel. Provided that this was the commoners section of the working district, the place was oddly refined. Daniel had guessed that the building hadn't been in this condition before the old man bought it. After unpacking his belongings, Daniel left his room and started looking for the old man. A little more than 3 hours had passed since the old man had left the three alone, and Daniel had decided to look for the old man in the lobby, as that was the most likely place to find him. When he reached the lobby, what he found wasn't the old man, but a group of young-looking people. Each one of these young men and women looked to be in their early 20s, and all of their attires looked refined, yet different. They were sitting on the couches and chatting. Some of them had great swords strapped on their back, while others had sheathed long swords, rapiers and daggers hanging from their belts. A couple of girls who were wearing the same outfit were holding two heavy-looking folding fans, one held hers closed within her folded arms, while the other kept it opened and used it to fan her face slowly, while some of the people in the group were even unarmed. The dynamics of this group of young men were unclear to Daniel. Some of these people were cordially talking to each other, some looked to be on the verge of starting a fight, and there were even some men pestering young women and vice versa. One thing that all of these people had in common, was a clear pride that grew a few meters taller than their heads. Daniel curiously looked at the top of their heads and noticed that most of them had a neutral or slightly negative karma. He had guessed that these young men and women were the proud children of powerful organizations, and by being nurtured by their groups, they didn't have enough chances to do anything that would grant them a good karma. "Thought we'd been here for half an hour already." "Exactly, just half an hour. Why can't you just be patient?" "He was fired. Why is he acting so high and mighty anyway?" "Idiot, why don't you ask him in person? We'll drag your decapitated body back to that shithole you call a school." He, how dare you? You bitch. And we could be together. If you accepted my sex marriage proposal. And why the hell should his family mix with your sect? We've known each other much longer. He should accept ours instead. A loud buzz of conversation was filling the lobby. As Daniel was still wondering what this loud group of people might be doing here, he was noticed by a young man at the edge of the crowd. This young man had a clean buzz cut and a faint scar which appeared parallel to his left eyebrow. His clothes were of a simple kind, but of a high quality. On his chest he wore a thin leather armor, marked with the beautiful carving of a tree on the right side of his chest. Underneath the leather armor he wore a long-sleeved black shirt, and a pair of vambraces covered his forearms. His long pants were tucked inside of a pair of boots of the same color as the leather armor. The young man had fairly good looks and was one of the few who wasn't carrying a weapon. "Hey! There is someone there." The entire crowd quietened and looked towards Daniel. The first to talk was one of the two women that were holding a folding fan. Unfolding her arms, she pointed her closed folding fan towards Daniel. "Servant, come here," she said in a domineering tone. Daniel's face didn't change in the slightest. He simply turned around and started heading back from the way he came, when... "Hey! How dare you ignore me?" she shouted angrily. There she goes again. We should stop, shouldn't we?" "Nah, if she want to waste her chances because of her bad attitude. So be it." The buzz of conversation started once more as the young woman got up from her seat, and started heading towards Daniel with a face filled with anger. It didn't take long for the girl to approach Daniel, and after lifting her hand, she swung it down towards Daniel's face. What the girl didn't expect, unfortunately, was that this servant would avoid the slap, making her miss completely. "Ha ha ha. Look. It's the legendary technique of the folding crane school. Fly swatting slap. Ha ha ha," said a young woman in the crowd, whose group apparently didn't have a good relationship with the folding crane school. Some of the group of young men and women laughed at the girl's derisive remark, while others had an embarrassed look on their faces. The faces of the two girls holding folding fans turned as red as apples. "How dare you embarrass me in front of everybody? I'll cut your head for this," said the girl that had previously missed Daniel. She then unfolded her fan, and as she was about to attack Daniel with it, the young man in leather armor held her by her wrist and said, all right. Calm down. Do I need to remind you where we are?" The girl was truly enraged, and being stopped by someone when trying to regain face for her school had made her even angrier. "Let go of me," she shouted while trying time after time to free herself from the man's hand, but that was all for naught. The young man was an experienced martial artist, and all the young woman's hits had been easily parried or evaded. After no less than 2 minutes of failed attempts, the young woman finally calmed down. Noticing the changes in the young woman's temperament, the young man in leather armor let go of her hand. The girl then threw a deadly glare at Daniel and walked back towards her group, sitting back to her place. The young man in leather armor turned towards Daniel and said, "Forgive her for her rude words, can you tell us where your master is?" Daniel didn't have a problem with talking with this group of people, but he didn't want to be treated as a servant. Considering the much more polite demeanor of the young man, Daniel decided to answer him. "I am nobody's servant, and I don't know who you mean by master," said Daniel. The answer caught the young man and the rest of the group by surprise. "Aren't you a servant working for the old man who owns this building?" said a burly-looking young man with a great sword strapped to his back. "I am not, I have just rented 3 rooms, and I'll be staying here with my sisters," responded Daniel. The faces of everyone present twisted in confusion. Various small groups formed as the buzz of conversation started once more. "Do you know where the old man is?" asked a tall and handsome young man with long hair, who had previously been pestered by various girls into accepting the marriage proposal advanced from their groups. "No idea," answered Daniel to the handsome-looking man. The man in the leather armor looked at the group and shrugged his shoulders while saying, "Let's just wait." "There is no need," said a powerful voice resounded through the entire lobby. Its origin couldn't be distinguished, but all people present felt a shiver run down their spine when they heard it. Daniel had recognized it as the voice of the old man, owner of the building. "Sir, our groups have heard that you have taken in disciples recently. We were wondering if you would consider us," said the handsome young man while bowing his head. There was no answer. Minutes passed one after the other, and as the handsome-looking young man was about to talk again, the one with the leather armor stopped him. After the handsome-looking young man noticed who had stopped him, he quietly turned towards the young man wearing the leather armor. One could guess that the two clearly had a good relationship. The young man in leather armor looked at the handsome-looking man and said, "I don't think he has taken in any disciples. All of our forces received the news that 3 teenagers had entered the building about 3 hours ago. My guess is that this little guy and his sisters are the 3 teenagers. And that they are here as well, new tenants." The handsome young man's eyes opened wide. "You are telling me that the previous master at arms of Carolus, after retirement, simply bought a building in the commoners section and is looking for tenants?" he asked with clear disbelief in his tone. Every other conversation stopped as everyone within the large group looked at the pair of young men. Their eyes growing bigger by the second. Disbelief plastered on their faces. A very few members of the group weren't as surprised, as they had had the same guess as the young man in leather armor. After a few minutes, the looks of surprise turned into pensive expressions. And as most of them seemed to be in the midst of taking a decision within their minds, the young man in leather armor said in a low voice, "Sir, is it possible to rent a room?" Chapter 16 Master at Arms. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Sir, is it possible to rent a room?" The echo of the words pronounced by the young man in leather armor reverberated through the enormous hall, leaving everybody faces, Daniel's included, contorted in a mix of astonishment and surprise. Quietness reigned in the hall for a few moments until, one voice after the other, started to resound. "I would like to rent a room as well. Sir, please take us in." "Me too, please." Daniel had hundreds of unanswered questions in his mind. Apparently, the old man had retired from being the master at arms of Carolus 2 years ago. Being a powerful cultivator and an expert in many sorts of weapons, he had instructed various of the highest-ranking officers within the kingdom, and even members of the royal family. After retiring, he decided to purchase the hotel. His actions didn't go unnoticed, as many powerful forces had located him within the city of Fury. The master at arms was an excellent teacher, and his ability to nurture the weapon mastery and character of his disciples had been so widely known, that many powerful forces tried to rope him into their groups. The master at arms was one of the instructors of the royal palace, so none of these powers were capable of forcing him to join them. The only viable alternative was to send their prodigies to him and let them be shaped by the teachings of this powerful figure. They would then return to their forces and learn their families, sects and schools' signature arts. 2 long years had passed since the old man had purchased the hotel, and yet many talented members of the younger generation had been rejected. The reason had always been that the master at arms refused to take in any disciple. When all these powerful forces were starting to consider this as the end of this old monster's career, a young man and 2 young women had been allowed in the hotel by the master at arms himself. The news spread like wildfire. All the cultivators placed to monitor the old man's actions, reported to their factions immediately. Their response was to send their most talented disciples and hope for them to be accepted as well. The 30 young men and women within the group were members of some of Fury's factions, and if Daniel hadn't left the lobby, he would have seen them arrive one after the other. Suddenly, a similar but calmer voice than the previous was heard from behind the group. The rent is 1 gold coin each month. As the group turned around and noticed the old man standing behind them, they collectively bowed to him deeply. "Get up. I'm not your teacher, I'm your landlord," said the old man in a slightly annoyed tone, before walking towards the stairs and starting to explain. "Go pick a room, then leave the payme." The explanation of the building's utilities was the same as the one Daniel, Rayla and Maya had received. It was at that moment that Daniel realized. He hadn't simply rented 3 rooms inside a dismissed hotel, owned by a solitary old man. He had paid the membership for a martial arts school started by a retired monster. That was only partially true. Provided that the school wasn't an official one, and that the old man never promised any teaching, the reason why he had purchased the hotel and had had training grounds built in it, was to start a sort of school, in which anyone could join. He was tired of teaching to proud children of powerful factions. He hoped to find disciples with no backing and good morale to which he could impart his teachings, and that they would then pass these teaching to others in the future. For 2 years he had waited, until one day, a couple of young girls arrived at his door. One of them was forthright and of a good nature. He liked this type of people the most, and every time he tried to shape the character of one of his disciples, he would try to turn them into this kind of people. The second girl, to his stupor, was the young mistress of the ruling house, and daughter of one of his first and most successful disciples, the master of the ruling house, Derhor Ruling. The old man had always felt guilty about not being able to prevent the extermination of the ruling house. He had been their master's teacher, and had imparted morale and strength of character to him. To believe that he would defect to another kingdom, that was bullshit. Pure and simple. The 2 young girls looked for a place to stay. That was when he decided that the 2 would be the starting point of his school. 2 days later. The past 2 days had been chaotic. Every day, a few young cultivators would arrive at the hotel and ask to be taken as disciples. But after receiving a clean rejection, they would almost always try to rent a room. It was clear that most of them had been warned that the only option to stay was to rent a room and becoming one of the building's tenants. Daniel wasn't too happy about it, but he had to admit that, having this building all for themselves, was simply unrealistic. Somebody else was bound to come. He just didn't expect so many people to come so soon. In the past couple of days, Daniel had managed to reach the peak of the vasodilation stage, but before he could break through, he had finished his beast cores. What was left of the 20 gold coins that he had received from the auction, after paying for their debt and for the rooms, was less than a half. Daniel knew what he needed to do. He needed to hunt for more powerful beasts and sell their cores. He needed more resources to break through, and in order to obtain more resources, he required money. But before doing that, he needed to learn how to use weapons. He had the strength, but he couldn't go around hunting for rank 3 beast with a rock in his hand. Daniel knew nothing about weapons, so all he could do was go by his needs, and what he needed was a weapon for distance and a weapon for close-range combat. Without thinking about it too much, he headed towards the training grounds. The training grounds were none other than an enormous backyard separated into 4 sections. The first section had various square rings whose sides were attached, making it possible for it to be used as a single large stage. The second section had numerous practice dummies, and weapon racks furnished with all kinds of wooden and regular weapons, were placed all around. The third was filled with different instruments to enhance the body strength and endurance. Ultimately, the last section contained various obstacle courses and structures to practice one's agility and equilibrium. After reaching the training grounds, what surprised Daniel was that the place was completely filled with people. Most of the young men and women that had arrived in the last 2 days were here, and of the first 30 people, none were missing. Some of them were practicing the basics, others were sparring, and some were even trying their techniques against wooden dummies. These practice dummies, like the chandeliers, had been magically enchanted. No matter the damage they received, they would rapidly repair themselves in just a few seconds. Daniel found a free corner and sat on the ground. He then took a book out of his backpack, and started reading. Those who noticed his actions were slightly annoyed, but when they noticed what book he was reading, their face changed, contorted into a mixture of outrage and disdain. The book that Daniel was reading was called The Very Basics of Swordplay, and was the most basic manual of practicing the sword. Amongst these young cultivators, every single sword wielder had studied this book right after learning how to read. Daniel immersed himself in reading the manual, and after an hour and a half, he closed it and got up on his feet. He then started walking towards the weapon rack. After reaching the weapon rack, he took a practice sword and went back to his corner. He then started to slowly practice the basics of swordsmanship. When the various cultivators noticed Daniel's awkwardness when practicing the basics of the sword, they lost interest in him and focused back on their training. Nobody was paying attention to Daniel anymore. Time slowly passed as Daniel stayed in his corner. What nobody had noticed were the changes in his mastery. In fact, if one were to look closely, they would notice that, after just 10 sets, Daniel had become used to the feel of the sword. After 25 sets, his motions hardly contained any mistake, and after 25 more, he had mastered the basics of the swordsmanship described by the book. After less than 3 hours, Daniel had mastered how to hold the sword, the various stances and a few types of simple attacks. When Daniel was about to stop, the eyes of some of the present ended on him, and when they noticed his level of swordsmanship, the disdain on their faces became deeper than ever. Everyone who had looked at him had thought that he had simply pretended to be just starting to learn swordsmanship, and that he wanted to appear as a prodigy in front of the old man. In their minds, that was the only explanation that made sense. Before they could manage to send a few insults, or even start a fight with him, their eyes opened to an unnatural degree and their backs straightened like a set of brooms. Behind Daniel, the old man had appeared out of thin air, and was standing quietly. Daniel had finished his practice, as he didn't find any purpose in training further with the basics of the sword. When he was about to turn around to head back to the weapon rack, he noticed the unsettled looks on the faces of the others. But he rapidly noticed that these looks weren't directed at him. He slowly turned around and found the old man standing behind him. "Old man, need something?" said Daniel. A proverbial ton of bricks fell on the heads of everyone present. The face of the old man was unchanged, his right arm still behind his back while the other raised in front of his chest, accompanying his hand into a slow brushing of his beard. He looked like he was pondering something. After a few moments of silence, Daniel added, "Okay. Well, I have to go now, if you need something before stopping." The old man's right arm started moving from behind his back, and when he moved it in front of him, Daniel saw that it was holding a book and halberd. The old man's action surprised Daniel greatly. Not only because the old man had taken a weapon and a book from behind his back, but because the halberd was at least 2.5 meters tall, standing much higher than the old man. How the old man managed to hide it behind his body was a mystery to him. Looking at the young man in front of him, the old man stopped brushing his beard and finally said, "I'll give you 5 hours. Learn how to use this halberd. And you won't need to pay your rent for 2 months." His low, yet powerful voice reached every corner of the training grounds. Daniel's face changed immediately. 2 gold coins in exchange of 5 hours of training, that wasn't an opportunity he was willing to let go. "Deal," he responded calmly. He took the halberd from the old man's hand and put it on the ground. He then grabbed the book and started reading through its pages. The title of the book was "Basic Guide on Polearms Training." Before starting to study the book's content, he thought, "Sua, mind activating the system for me once again." Chapter 17. I don't need a teacher. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sua, mind activating the system for me once again. After accepting the old man's conditions, Daniel started to study the basics of polearms wielding. 2 hours later, he picked up the halberd from the ground, and started to practice the basic moves, body movements and familiarize with the weapon. To the eyes of the spectating group of people that had gathered around the two, what Daniel was doing was acting. Inside the old man's mind, different thoughts had started to form. He was torn between two possibilities. The first was that Daniel was a prodigy, capable of learning the use of weapons 100 times faster than a normal person. While the second was that he had been pretending. He had reasons to believe both of these possibilities to be false. For example, such a speed in learning the use of weapons was unheard of. Provided that one was a genius and understood perfectly the theory behind the basics of weapon wielding. They would still need practice to get used to the weight and maneuverability of the weapon. Regarding his second hypothesis, Daniel, in order to be able to fool him by pretending to be a beginner, would not only need to have mastered the use of the sword, but also reached a perfect mastery of its most advanced stages. That is why he had given him the halberd and the beginner manual for pole arms. He believed that, if he was a true prodigy, he would have been able to see stunning results from Daniel's brief training. He was also certain that, even if Daniel had been a master in the use of the sword, he wouldn't have had the time to master two different weapons to such a level. The old man's face was as calm as ever, and he quietly stood with his eyes glued to Daniel. The young men and women that had been practicing in the training grounds were now surrounding the two, and discussing quietly. What's the point of this test? Most of us mastered the basics of various weapons. The brat is just boasting. We all could pretend to be beginners and to be learning something we already know at an amazing speed. Most of them were convinced that Daniel had been cheating the old man, but there were a few, hidden within the group, that were looking attentively at Daniel. They had been warned by their powers that the old man hardly showed attention to untalented disciples, and that it was almost impossible to be fooled. Amongst these few people, were the young man in leather armor, the handsome young man with long hair, and the girl with the folding fan that accompanied the one who had attacked Daniel. The two young men approached the girl, and the handsome young man said to her, "Riri, what do you think?" The girl turned around and noticed the two young men standing behind her. She then answered, "You use the rapier. That's an unusual weapon. Do you have a manual for it?" "I have stopped practicing the basics years ago," he said before turning towards the young man in leather armor. "Nilo, do you have a manual of martial arts to test him with?" Nilo, the young man in leather armor, said, "Let's first see how he handles the halberd." His eyes bright and curious. One would imagine a martial artist like Nilo to be more direct and impulsive, but that wasn't him. He had always been cautious, and tried to observe the situation before acting. It was by observing the situation that he had befriended the handsome young man with long hair. A few years back, he was roaming the kingdom, when he had heard sudden screams coming from a nearby place. After reaching the source of the noise, he saw a young man attacking a woman. This woman had fairly good looks, but wore commoner's clothes. She had a terrified look on her face, and her cries for help sounded desperate. In front of her, stood a young man wielding a thin 1-meter-long sword. One would immediately think that the woman had been in danger, and that the young man had ill intentions, but he didn't act right away. He observed, and noticed that the young man's back had a black spot which stained his otherwise spotlessly clean white shirt. He had also noticed that his breath was weak, his hair disheveled, and his legs were shaking. After noticing the young martial artist, the handsome young man had told him to stay away, for his own good, that had made him curious about the woman, so he observed her attentively and noticed that her hands were a little too smooth, without the slightest sign to testify a rough life. In his mind, a thought formed. How did this woman escape a younger and trained man? In the end, he had learned that the woman was an assassin, sent by the Purple Leaf sect, a known assassin sect, with the mission of assassinating the handsome young man. After realizing that the handsome young man wasn't threatening him, but was instead trying to preventing him from getting into this mess instead, he decided to treat his injuries. They then traveled together, and became friends. His instinct were telling him, once again, that he needed to observe before judging. Half an hour had passed since Daniel had finished studying the manual. His progress were rapidly witnessed by the old man and the crowd. Daniel had found the halberd slightly more difficult to get used to. Its weight was bigger, and it had to be balanced on a much longer shape. It also required him to use both hands to wield it, which required him to have a better control of his body. But no matter how much more difficult it was, after 10 repetitions he still got used to the new weapon. After 30, he hardly made any mistake, and after 50 more, his movements looked like the physical interpretation of the manual. In the crowd, next to Riri, the other fan-wielding girl had appeared. He is clearly faking it. It's just the basics. 3 months would be enough for us to master them as well, she said, with a hint of anger in her voice. I bet the old man is just humoring the brat out of boredom. Nobody is forcing you to stay here, Miri, said the handsome young man. You. MHH, she then turned around and left. Riri looked at him and said, you'll never get over it, will you? Finn, her eyes rolled with annoyance before she focused back into looking at Daniel. A few minutes later, the 5 hours timeline had ended. Daniel was facing the old man. In his hands, the manual and the halberd. I bet he'll slap him into smithereens. He. Maybe he'll give him another weapon. As Daniel was about to hand the weapon and the book back to their owner, the old man turned towards the crowd and said, a manual of martial arts basics in exchange for assisting to one of your training sessions. Before the words of the old man ended, Nilo's arm was already up. Every single pair of eyes within the crowd flashed in realization. The martial artists amongst the crowd started to bite their own teeth in regret. They had missed a chance. The old man looked at Nilo and nodded at him. Nilo walked amongst the crowd and reached the old man. He then presented himself while bowing. Nilo Gria, 15th generation disciple of the school of the swift palm of oppression. He then took a book out of his backpack and handed it over to the old man. The old man took notice of Nilo's rapid response. He appreciated attentive and cautious people. He had had many of these kinds of disciples in the past, and whenever he could, he tried to shape their cunning into avoiding problems, instead of creating them. After taking the manual off his hands, he looked at Daniel once more and said, same deal. 3 hours. A year of free rent, said the old man while brushing his gray beard. A year added to the previous 2 months? Inquired Daniel while narrowing his eyes slightly. The corner of the old man's lips curved into a faint smile that disappeared the very next moment. That's right, he responded. Deal, said Daniel excitedly. The old man had been surprised by Daniel's talent. Mastering 2 different kinds of weapons to that level, at his age, was nigh impossible. He was almost certain that Daniel was an unheard-of prodigy, and him learning the basics of martial arts would confirm his guess. Martial arts and weapons were hardly skills learned together. One's body evolved to perfect the use of the practitioner's weapon of choice, or practiced martial art. Daniel could have been a master with different kinds of weapons, but him being capable in martial arts as well was like expecting a swimmer, whose strongest parts of the body were shoulders, back and arms, to also be a great runner, whose main focus was strengthening the legs. It is important to understand that, in order to break through from the muscle strengthening stage, one didn't require to increase the mass of his muscles. One simply had to refine their existing muscles through the use of ki. Daniel had never practiced any martial art, nor had he shaped his muscles through the use of weapons. His body had always been lean and agile, perfect for a pickpocketer and petty thief such as himself. The manual of martial arts which Nilo had given to the old man, was the basic of a commonly known martial art called true motion, and it was a martial art that, if properly learned, would help practitioners to avoid most unnecessary movements. The basics of true motion simply pointed out the correct ways of walking, running and breathing. It also pointed out the most commonly made mistakes during these actions. Daniel finished reading the very limited yet detailed information contained within the manual in just 40 minutes. He then sat on the ground and started to practice the correct way of breathing. His karma points kept on slowly decreasing as he breathed in and out. He didn't require the system's help to learn how to do something. What the system was useful for was getting used to what he learned. For example, one could see the correct way of writing a letter when learning how to write, but they would need practice to get their hands used to the swift motions. What Daniel's system did, was to interact with his ability to correct his own mistakes, and help him avoid making them in the future. Breathing was a natural action for human beings, and easy to control, so it didn't take long for Daniel to perfect his breathing. 10 minutes after he started to practice following the true motion instructions, his breath had already become stable, and a few more minutes later, the correct way of breathing had become natural to him. The same happened for his way of walking and running. His natural agility had helped him in perfecting his motion, and the karmic system had helped him in rapidly getting used to the recently learned correct ways. 2 hours after Daniel had started to practice the basics of true motion, and he had already completely mastered its teachings. The natural way in which Daniel had used the correct way walking when approaching the old man had surprised the entire crowd greatly. The old man was no exception. When Daniel stopped, he was standing right in front of the old man. The old man looked at him carefully, his hand still brushing his gray beard. After minutes of quietly observing Daniel, he finally opened his mouth and said, "Brat, how do you feel about becoming my student?" Daniel looked back at the old man, and without giving him the slightest bit of face, he said, "I don't need a teacher." Chapter 18 The Huntsman Guild. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I don't need a teacher. Before the crowd could process the shock of witnessing the old man proposing to Daniel to become his student, his rapid response had forced them into quietness. For the next minute, the silence was deafening. The old man had been left speechless. From his point of view, Daniel had no reason to refuse. He was a prodigy in need of a teacher who could shape him into a great warrior, but he had been quickly rejected. The reason of Daniel's unexpected rejection was only known to him. While the crowd believed that Daniel was just a conman who had struck gold, and the old man believed him to be an undiscovered prodigy, the truth was much simpler. Daniel had ran out of karma points to spend. It was at the end of the practice with the basics of true motion that Sua had suggested that he should avoid accepting any other challenge, as he was almost completely out of karma points. After Sua's warning, Daniel checked his profile. Dan Heel. Karmic Systems Wielder. Age. 14 rank. Peak rank 3 of Martial Cultivation. Early rank 2 of Spiritual Cultivation Karma. 99. Weapons Masteries, Details, Martial Arts, Details. Daniel's profile had an overall change. His karma points had drastically decreased, his rank had been upgraded to the peak rank 3 of Martial Cultivation, and last but not least, new informations had appeared on his profile. Masteries. Details. Just as Daniel thought about the details of his masteries, the profile window expanded, and a set of additional informations appeared on it. Dan Heel. Karmic Systems Wielder. Age. 14 rank. Peak rank 3 of Martial Cultivation. Early rank 2 of Spiritual Cultivation Karma. 99. Weapon Masteries. Swords. 1%, Details, Polearms. 3%, Details. After noticing the details of his masteries, a shiver ran down Daniel's back. From the details given, he believed the karmic system to be capable of including every single martial art, weapon, and possibly even magic, into the wielder's percentage of mastery. For curiosity, he thought about the details of his polearms masteries, and a new window appeared. Polearms 3% bladed polearms. 10% thrusting polearms. 0% staffs. 0%. All this happened during the few seconds it took for Daniel to approach the old man, right after he had finished learning true motion's basics. When the old man proposed to become his teacher, all he could do was refuse, because if the old man decided to start his teachings right away, he wouldn't be able to show the same level of results. What he needed now, was to spend his last few karma points into learning how to use a throwing weapon, and hunt for more beast cores. He didn't have an immediate need for money right now, and he would have gladly stayed in the hotel to master the use of every weapon he could find, but he had some pressing matters to take care of. Like finding his uncle, who was currently being forced into slavery in the city's mines. Or obtain enough resources to reach the perfect stage of the body strengthening stage. In front of everyone's unbelieving eyes, Daniel bowed towards the old man, and left the training ground. After 12 straight hours of training, he needed to sleep. The next day, Daniel went back to training ground. As always, a large number of young men and women were practicing with their weapons martial arts. The moment Daniel stepped into the training grounds, various sets of eyes moved on him. He ignored the stares and started walking towards the weapon racks. Many were caught by surprise once again when they noticed the type of weapon Daniel had picked. What was in Daniel's hand was a small set of throwing knives. Daniel's weapon of choice for ranged combat were throwing knives, and he had two simple reasons for it. The first was that he didn't need a manual to learn how to throw knives, as everyone was capable of learning with enough practice. The second reason was that throwing knives were useful for sneak attacks and middle-range fights. As a pickpocketer, he had quick fingers, so this kind of weapon was suitable for him. After reaching the practice target, he started to train right away. The knives Daniel was using were made of a single piece of steel. There was no handle on the grip and the only sharpened part was the blade. Their weight was completely balanced, which made them the easiest type of throwing knives to start practicing with. His first few throws were a complete failure, but he slowly got used to the weight and shape of the knives. The spectating practitioners didn't find it odd that Daniel would appear inexperienced at first. Many had witnessed how Daniel had mastered the basics of sword wielding, polearms wielding, and of the martial art. True motion. While those who didn't witness it personally, had at least heard of it. Daniel's progress was, as always, impressive. After only half an hour of uninterrupted training, he stopped missing the target. After 2 more hours, 2 out of 10 throws would hit the bullseye. After 4 hours of uninterrupted practice, only 1 throw out of 10 missed bullseye. This result was satisfactory to Daniel, so he left the training ground, and went back into his room. Commoners Section, 3rd Gate of the Eastern Wall, 8.10. Daniel was standing in front of a large building. This building was of a simple rectangular shape, and it stood about 15 meters high. Its large double doors had been blocked open, and many individuals dressed in light clothes, and armed with various types of weapons, moved in and out of the building in a constant stream. The only 2 details that made this building different from the others, were the large dark green banners that draped down its walls, on which the silhouette of a stag had been sewn with golden thread. The other, was the thick wooden sign that was hanging above the entrance. On it, carved in black, were 3 simple words: the Huntsman Guild. The Huntsman Guild, along with the Mercenary Union, and the Golden Cauldron, were a few of the many organized groups tied to the Merchants Collective. To be more specific, any group whose main purpose was collecting herbs, beast cores, ranked beasts' carcasses, alchemical ingredients, or even offer protection services, was strictly tied to the Merchants Collective, whose influence spanned through the entire kingdom. When Daniel had come back to the city, right after he had assisted to the battle between the 2 ranked beasts, he had claimed to have been sent from a herbalist to look for plants. That excuse implied that he had applied for a job at the Golden Cauldron, a group whose main goal is to collect alchemical ingredients, which they would then sell to the Merchants Collective, or use themselves. Similarly to the Golden Cauldron, the main dealings of the Huntsman Guild was to send hunters in the area surrounding Fury to hunt and collect ranked beasts' cores and carcasses, which they would then sell to the Merchants Collective. The hunter's job had been a prestigious one in the past, but since the overall strength of the beasts around the city had drastically decreased, the branch situated in Fury had fallen into disgrace. The fact was that, differently from the Mercenaries' Union, whose branches were built at the end of commercial roads, and Golden Cauldron's branches, which were built next to forests and fertile ground. The Huntsman Guild was a nomadic group of sorts. In fact, whenever a new city was founded, its untouched surroundings were always a rich hunting ground. Consequently, when a new branch was opened within a new city, that branch would be automatically considered the new Huntsman Guild's headquarters. Firi's branch was thousands of years old, and numerous new branches had been opened in just as many younger cities. The main revenue of the Huntsman Guild came from experienced hunters who pushed themselves far from the city walls, to look for stronger prey. "Next," said the woman behind the desk inside the Huntsman Guild's building. Daniel approached the counter and said, "I would like to apply for a hunting party, your membership," said the woman. Daniel's brows furrowed. "Do I need one?" The woman looked him up for a few seconds, then responded, "Aren't you a little young to join a hunting party? These people hunt beasts. Ranked beasts. Are you going to hunt them, or are you going to feed them?" Her tone growing more displeased the more she talked. "If I won't be able to hunt them, I will at least feed one," said Daniel sarcastically. The woman started laughing. Tears almost forming in the corner of her eyes, she barely stopped to say, "It would be even funnier if you weren't so skinny." Ha ha ha. She then stopped laughing, watched Daniel once more, and after realizing that he wasn't there to humor her, she turned serious and asked, "All right kid, I'll put you up for a hunting party. When do you want to go?" "Right now," answered Daniel immediately. The woman furrowed her brows and looked at Daniel. She then asked, "Right now? Where are your weapons? You don't even have a bow." Daniel, looking embarrassed for the first time, responded, "Yeah. About that. I don't use the bow. But I might need a sword and a few throwing knives." The woman started laughing once more. She then said, "Well, you can always kill them," from laughter. Ha ha ha. "All right, a membership costs 1 silver, renting a sword costs 10 copper, throwing knives go 4. After a good half an hour of explanations, Daniel was finally able to obtain his membership and join a hunting party. The members of his team were waiting for him at the first gate of the southwestern wall. When Daniel reached the gate, he noticed a group of 4 people waiting. One of them was a lean man. He seemed to be in his middle 20s and he had an arched nose so big, that it looked completely out of place. Strapped on his back, was a longbow and a quiver filled with arrows. The second one was an older man that looked to be nearing his 60th birthday. His back was very straight, and while his clothes looked like a pile of dirty cloth, one could understand why he would pick that outfit when moving through the forest. His weapon was a set of short spears, which similarly to the lean man, were strapped to his back. The remaining 2 people were a teenage boy and girl. Instinctively, one could guess that the 2 were a couple, but if one were to carefully look at their faces, they would notice the similarities in their features and eyes. The 2 were most likely brother and sister. The woman looked a year younger than the man, but they both looked like they were in their late teens. They both had blonde hair, green eyes, and bodies that looked like they were made for hunting. Both of them could be considered very attractive. The brother's weapon was a great sword, while his sister's weapon were a pair of bolas hung to her belt. When Daniel approached the group, a mix of reactions could be seen in their faces. The 2 young teenagers furrowed their brows at him, then started discussing amongst themselves in whispers. The old man simply turned around and waited for the last person to arrive, and lastly, the only person who approached Daniel was the man in his mid-20s. "Can we help you with something?" said the man. "I'm your 5th," said Daniel while smiling. The man had no problems with Daniel being too young and inexperienced. After all, you were paid depending on the beasts that you yourself killed, not by how many beasts were killed by the group. "Wonderful. We are waiting for our escort to arrive, then we'll depart right away," said the man jovially. Daniel nodded and then found a place to sit. Half an hour later, a robust man in leather armor and cleanly cut hair, approached the group. A deep scar that started from above the middle of his eyebrow, and finished on his cheekbone could be seen clearly, giving the man's face a permanent serious expression. At his waist he had a sword, and on his chest armor, a golden eagle was finely carved. Chapter 19 The First Kill. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sir, thank you for being here, said the lean man with the large nose. According to the Huntsman Guild's regulations, in order to form a hunting party, the presence of an escort was required. That role was usually taken by a member of the mercenary union, or at times, by a licensed member of the army or city guard. The escort were required to have reached the cultivation rank set by the Huntsman Guild, which was the peak of the corresponding rank of the strongest known monsters of the area. For example, if the general strength of the beast inhabiting the area in which the hunting party was heading to, was of the second rank, the escort needed to have at least reached the peak of the second rank. Their group's escort was set to be at the peak of rank 3, as powerful rank 3 beasts lived within those canyons. Daniel's hunting party was heading out to hunt for steel-back scorpions, a rank 2 beast which nested the canyons that separated the immense mountains of the Sinlia, the mountain range south of Firi. The canyons and mountains of the Sinlia, due to the large number of mines, had a constant stream of people coming and going. Therefore, after numerous reports of attacks from steel-back scorpions had been sent to the city, the Huntsman Guild had been charged with the task of reducing their numbers within the practiced zones. Names and guild's badge, said the robust man in a domineering tone while taking a small list out of his pocket. Sella, Silver Hunter, said the lean man while handing his badge to the robust man. The rest of the group, used to this kind of procedure, took their badges out of their backpacks, and handed them over to the escort while stating their names. Garth, said the old man in mimetic attire while handing over a pale gold badge. The teenage boy took a step forward and said, I am Lego, and she is my sister Fiora. We both are silver hunters. Daniel imitated what the rest of the group did, and handed his newly acquired badge while stating his name. Dan, Bronze Hunter. The brows of the entire group except for the old man's furrowed after Daniel's words. They collectively looked at him. The escort was the first to talk, a bronze hunter. What the fuck do we need a bronze hunter for? How did you get assigned to this hunting party? Said the escort as rudely as he could. There must have been a mistake. Bronze rank is for rank 1 hunters. Or first-time hunters. We are hunting for rank 2 beasts, said Sella, trying to calm the escort. This is my first mission, responded Daniel, confirming Sella's theory. After looking at Daniel one more time, the guard harumphed and said, whatever. Brat, try not to slow the group down. He then turned towards the rest of the group and said, I am Stu, an elite of Carolus's army. From the military rank, the party could guess the strength of their escort. Similarly to hunters, the military grades existed to separate their members by strength. Those who had reached the rank 1, if part of the military, were common soldiers, while if part of the Huntsman Guild or mercenary union, they were considered as bronze members. The difference between military ranks and ranks granted by other types of groups, was that one's cultivation wasn't enough to advance in the military. A mercenary or hunter could simply gain experience and, after reaching a new cultivation level, they could apply for a promotion within their group. Differently, soldiers had to pass various tests that would determine their ability to command. An elite was a member of the military that hadn't managed to pass the tests to advance to the next grade, so, instead of being a lieutenant, Stu had the rank of elite sergeant. This ensured the party that their escort was of, at least, the peak of rank 3. Let's move out, said Stu before heading towards the city gates. 50 kilometers south of Firi, 21.38 After 12 hours of uninterrupted walking, the hunting party had decided to set camp for the night. During their journey, none of them, except for Sella, had talked much. Daniel considered him the group's chatterbox. The members of the hunting party had been approached more than once by him, in hope to start a conversation, but whenever Sella approached Daniel, he would start playing with his throwing knives. He would always pretend be a beginner, almost dropping them and scaring Sella into leaving him alone. The rest of the group gave him no more chances than he did. The escort acted annoyed whenever he was talked to, the two siblings would keep to themselves, and the old man refused to interact even if talked to. 5 tents had been set around a small campfire. Daniel was on guard duty, so he sat on a tree stump next to the campfire. In his hand, a piece of dried meat which he munched on slowly. The rest of the group was resting inside their tents. 4 hours passed uneventfully. Only the noises of insects lurking within the grass reached Daniel's ears. They had yet to reach the mountains, so their camp had been set on a patch of forest that had been cleared of trees. Only a few tree stumps remained. Daniel got up on his feet, and as he was about to go to Garth's tent, whose guard duty was about to start, he heard a distant scream coming from behind the tree line. The scream was a terrified one, and it sounded like the scream of a woman. * Primary quest started. Just a wandering hero. Description. Save those in need. First objective set. Save the woman in distress from the beast. Optional. Kill the bandit mage along with his summoned beast. Optional. Kill the hidden bandits. Reward. Karma plus 300, plus 200, plus 500, time limit. 4 minutes. Damn it. With no time to think, all Daniel could do was grab his sword and dash towards the tree line while shouting, "Bandits!" Half a minute later, he had reached the tree line. While closing in, he had noticed flashes of various colored lights coming from behind the trees, signs that a battle was taking place. My alternatives. Open approach difficulty. Extreme. Defeat the beast along with its summoner. Survive the bandit group's assault until the arrival of reinforcements from your party. Time limit. 3 minutes 20 seconds. Countdown. 5 minutes and 34 seconds. Requirements. Rank 4 of martial cultivation or rank 4 of spiritual cultivation, reward plus 200%, 1000 KP. Defensive approach difficulty. Hard. Support the woman until the arrival of reinforcements from your party. Time limit. 3 minutes and 20 seconds countdown. 5 minutes and 34 seconds reward plus 150%, 350 KP. Stealthy approach difficulty. Hard. Sneak attack the summoner hidden 35 meters southeast from your position. Do not alert the remaining group of bandits laying in wait 150 meters southeast from your position. Time limit. 3 minutes and 20 seconds reward plus 150%, 350 KP. With quiet steps, Daniel started heading towards the summoner's location. As he was closing in, he had managed to see the two battling parties. One was a woman in dark green robes, her face covered by a large hood. She was kneeling behind a thick wall of ice. On the other side, was a creature that Daniel had never seen. Its body had a humanoid shape and it walked on 2 feet, but its surface was covered in patches of rock, glued together by a thin layer of glowing lava. It looked like the lava lake on which melting rocks were slowly floating. From in between these glued rocks, molten lava dripped whenever it moved. This summoned beast was a lava elemental, which was summoned by mixing earth and fire magic. This combination of elements wasn't unusual for elemental mages. For example, during the war in which Daniel's father had died, the mage that had summoned the meteor shower which had wiped that division out of existence, had used a combination of fire and earth magic. Of course, Daniel didn't know anything about this. This lava elemental kept spouting a constant stream of molten rock out of his hands, which then crashed with the woman's ice wall, creating thin bubbles of lava filled with scorching steam. The ice wall kept repairing under the elemental's attacks, but unfortunately, it couldn't keep up with the speed it was melting. Only 2 minutes were left until the time limit, so Daniel stopped spectating the magical fight, and approached the summoner from the other side. He was currently 10 meters behind him, only a few trees were in between them. In his hands, he held 2 throwing knives. Step after step, Daniel approached the summoner. As he thought that he could avoid killing him and force him to surrender by pointing his sword at him, a snapping sound came from under his feet. Shit! Panic filled Daniel's heart as the mage turned around, but as soon as his eyes landed on Daniel, two small knives pierced through his throat and chest. In front of the shocked eyes of the dying summoner, stood a teenager with an expression filled with dread. In his mind, shame and regret for dying by this brat's hands. The moment the summoner dropped on the ground, the red flashes coming from the place where the battle was taking place disappeared. By reading the quest's description, Daniel had guessed that when a summoner dies, the summoned beast disappears as well, and now his guess had been confirmed. Shaking off the thoughts of having just killed a person, he approached the summoner's body and took his backpack. He then rushed towards the place where the battle had just ended. What he found in between the charred trees was the woman in green robes. She was laying above the only patch of unburned grass and looked to be unconscious. Daniel knew that the rest of the bandits were nearby, so he decided to take the woman and go back to the camp. In a few long steps, he arrived next to the woman's body, but as he was about to grab her, the woman's arm moved. Daniel had a knife pressed at his neck. The sharp blade had only dug 0.5 millimeter into Daniel's skin, so no blood came out. The woman, expecting him to be the summoner, had gone for the kill. If Daniel hadn't been a martial cultivator and his skin wasn't as durable as leather, he would have gotten his throat cut. Before the woman could react, Daniel grabbed her wrist with one hand and closed her mouth with the other. Shoo! I am not one of those who attacked you, I am the one who killed the other mage. He whispered. The woman didn't look convinced, and as she kept struggling, Daniel continued, I'll let you go now, but if you scream, I'll just run away and leave you to the group of bandits that's approaching. Do you understand? He said, his tone slightly annoyed. After a few moments, the woman seemed to have slightly calmed down. She nodded weakly and Daniel removed his hand from her mouth. Who are you? Asked the woman with a trembling voice. Daniel helped her up and responded, I'm a hunter from the Huntsman Guild, my party is camped 200 meters from here. Can you run? I can't. I can't even use magic. That elemental was so strong. They killed my guards, she said, almost on the verge of tears. Daniel looked at her for a moment, only a pair of heart-shaped pink lips could be seen from under her hood. Remember not to scream. And sorry for this. The last part had been said with a hint of embarrassment. The woman was slightly confused, but right the next moment, she realized why. Daniel had wrapped his arm around her waist and lifted her over his shoulder, then started running before she could fight back.